On June 2nd, 2010, in a small town of Eldon Creek, the town's annual summer fair, it was here that Sheriff Jack and Amina had first truly connected. Amid the laughter of children and the scent of freshly baked pies, they had shared stolen glances and cautious smiles. Jack had been supervising the event, but his eyes kept finding Amina in the crowd, her hijab a bright blue that mirrored the clear sky. She stood out not just for her beauty, but for her kind nature and confidence. Their paths crossed at the charity booth when Amina's bracelet slipped off her wrist and fell to the ground. Jack bent down to pick it up, their fingers brushing lightly. For an instant, the noise of the fair seemed to fade away. "I think this belongs to you," Jack said, handing the bracelet back, a hesitant smile on his face. "Thank you, Sheriff," Amina replied, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that lingered. The days that followed were marked by chance encounters. Amina's volunteer work often brought her to community events where Jack was present. Their conversations started off innocent enough, quick exchanges about town happenings and light banter. But as summer deepened, so did their conversations, venturing into shared hopes and whispered confessions. It was July 15th, 2010, when the boundary was crossed. A sudden summer storm had drenched the town, causing a power outage that blanketed Eldon Creek in darkness. Amina, caught outside in the rain, had taken shelter at the sheriff's office. Jack, surprised to find her shivering in the dimly lit lobby, offered her a towel and a hot drink. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain battering the window. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. The line they'd both been wary of was about to be crossed. It started with an innocent touch, a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but quickly escalated into a kiss that neither of them would forget. Now, standing alone in his office months later with Amina's letter in hand, Jack felt the weight of what they had done. Amina was pregnant, and there was no hiding it anymore. The ringing of the phone on his desk jolted him out of his trance. It was Deputy Harris, a young, eager officer who admired Jack. "Sheriff, you there?" Harris's voice was urgent. "We've got a situation down at Main Street." Jack's stomach dropped as he snapped back into reality. "On my way," he muttered, tucking the letter into his pocket. Little did he know, this call would mark the beginning of a series of events that would change Eldon Creek forever. Jack sped through the dimly lit streets of Eldon Creek, the echoes of the town's tranquility broken by the wail of his siren. The radio crackled with static as Deputy Harris's voice came through. "Sheriff, we've got a crowd forming. You need to get here fast." As Jack pulled up to Main Street, the scene was chaotic. Red and blue lights flashed against the old brick buildings, casting an eerie glow. Amina's father, Ibrahim, stood in front of his diner, his face ashen, shouting frantically in broken English at the deputies trying to calm him down. Next to him, a few townsfolk whispered to each other, their eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. Jack stepped out of his patrol car, squaring his shoulders. His secret weighed on him, but he had to maintain control. As he approached, Deputy Harris met him halfway. "It's Amina, Sheriff," Harris said, voice low. "She collapsed inside. We've got paramedics checking on her, but—" He hesitated, casting a glance back at the diner, where the glow of fluorescent lights revealed Amina lying on the floor, pale and motionless. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He pushed through the crowd, his pulse pounding in his ears. Ibrahim turned to him, eyes brimming with a mix of fear and anger. "What's happening to my daughter?" he demanded, gripping Jack's arm with a trembling hand. "Calm down, Mr. Hassan," Jack replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We're doing everything we can." The paramedics worked swiftly, their voices overlapping in a flurry of medical terms. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up at Jack. "She's stable for now, but we need to get her to the hospital immediately." Ibrahim followed the paramedics as they carried Amina out on a stretcher, his cries fading into the night as the ambulance sped away. The crowd began to disperse, leaving Jack standing in the chilly October air. The gravity of the situation settled on him, and he knew that secrets buried deep often had a way of clawing their way to the surface. The next morning, Eldon Creek buzzed with hushed conversations. The diner remained closed, a temporarily shut sign hung on its door, and the usual morning crowd at Ellie's Cafe was twice as large, all eyes darting around as whispers circulated. "Did you hear? They say Amina fainted because she's pregnant," an older woman muttered, glancing over her shoulder. "Pregnant? But she's just a girl," a man whispered back, eyebrows raised. "And who's the father?" "Must be some troublemaker from Chicago." Unbeknownst to them, Jack sat at the back corner table, his hat pulled low to hide his face. His cup of coffee sat untouched as he listened. Panic twisted in his gut. He thought about Amina in the hospital, the letter, and how quickly rumors spread in a town like Eldon Creek. He knew it wouldn't be long before the whispers turned into pointed fingers. A sudden creak of the cafe door interrupted his thoughts. It was Clara Whitman, a local reporter known for her sharp nose for scandal. Her eyes scanned the room before landing on Jack. She sauntered over, her notebook clutched like a weapon. "Sheriff Harlan, I didn't expect to see you here this early," Clara said, her voice dripping with curiosity. "I heard about Amina. Such a tragedy, isn't it?" Jack's jaw clenched. He met her gaze, seeing the glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. "It's an ongoing investigation, Clara. I can't comment." Of course," she replied, jotting notes anyway. "But the town's buzzing. People are saying all sorts of things. It must be hard for her father. And if there's any truth to the rumors of her condition, well, it makes one wonder, doesn't it?" Before Jack could respond, his radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, this is Deputy Harris. You're needed at the station. It's urgent." Jack stood abruptly, tipping his hat to Clara. "Duty calls," he said tersely before leaving the cafe and the watchful eyes that followed him. At the station, Harris waited with a grim expression. "Sheriff, I just got a call from the hospital. Amina's awake and she's asking for you." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He forced himself to remain calm as he nodded and grabbed his keys. The ride to the hospital was a blur, his mind racing with questions. What would she say? Did she intend to reveal everything? When he arrived, the sterile smell of the hospital greeted him, mingling with the quiet hum of machinery. He found Amina in a private room, her dark eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief when she saw him. "Jack," she whispered, her voice frail. He stepped closer, his guilt heavy. "Amina, I'm here." Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to speak. "They know. My father suspects. He found the letter. I don't know what to do." Jack's pulse raced. If Ibrahim knew, it was only a matter of time before the entire town did too. The secret he'd fought so hard to keep buried was now clawing its way out, threatening to tear his life apart. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was Ibrahim, eyes narrowed and lips pressed into a hard line. "Sheriff," he said, each word weighted with suspicion. "We need to talk." The walls seemed to close in on Jack as he realized this was just the beginning of a storm that would soon engulf them all. The tension in the hospital room was suffocating. Jack stood frozen as Ibrahim's eyes bore into him, searching for answers that he wasn't ready to give. Amina's breath quickened, and she looked away, unable to meet her father's gaze. Ibrahim's voice was low, barely more than a growl. "Sheriff, I've seen things. I'm not a fool. There's talk in town, and I need to know the truth. What are you doing here? Why is my daughter asking for you?" Jack swallowed hard, the weight of his lies pressing down on him. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, but there was no easy answer. The silence stretched unbearably until Amina spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Father, please," she whispered. "There are things you don't know." Ibrahim's face softened, only slightly. He stepped closer to Amina's bedside, his large frame casting a shadow over her. "Then tell me, my daughter. Tell me what this is all about." Amina closed her eyes, her fingers twisting the hospital blanket. She wanted to tell him, to confess the truth. But she hesitated, afraid of what it would do to her family and the life they had built. But before she could speak, Jack cleared his throat, drawing both of their attention. "Ibrahim," Jack began, forcing his voice to remain steady. "There are things I need to say, things you deserve to hear, but not here. Let's talk in private." Ibrahim's jaw clenched, but he nodded curtly. "Fine." The waiting room. They left Amina in the room, her eyes wide with worry as the door closed behind them. Jack led Ibrahim down the corridor, the fluorescent lights casting a stark, unforgiving glare. The waiting room was empty except for a few worn chairs and a vending machine that hummed in the corner. Jack took a deep breath. "Ibrahim, what I'm about to tell you is difficult, but you need to know the truth. Amina is pregnant, and I am the father." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ibrahim's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to fury. His hands balled into fists at his sides, and for a moment Jack thought he might strike him. But instead, Ibrahim's voice shook with restrained rage. You did this? How dare you? You betrayed my trust, the trust of this entire town." He took a step back, his face contorted with anger. "She's just a girl, my daughter. And you, a man who's supposed to protect this community, you—" His voice broke, and he turned away, pressing a hand to his mouth. Jack's heart pounded, the guilt churning in his gut. "I know I failed you, and I failed her. It was wrong, and I take full responsibility, but please don't punish her for my mistakes." Ibrahim spun around, eyes glistening with a mix of betrayal and grief. "It's too late for that, Sheriff. The damage is done. And if you think I'll stand by while my daughter suffers the consequences of your actions, you're wrong." Before Jack could respond, the waiting room door burst open, and Deputy Harris appeared, eyes wide with urgency. "Sheriff, we have a problem. Clara Whitman is outside the hospital with a news crew. She's saying there's breaking news about Amina and you." The blood drained from Jack's face. It was as if the ground had been ripped from under him. The storm he'd feared had arrived faster than he'd imagined. Outside the hospital, a small crowd had gathered. Clara Whitman stood in front of the camera, her voice clear and precise as she delivered the news. "Today, shocking allegations have surfaced involving Sheriff Jack Harlan and 18-year-old Amina Hassan, daughter of the well-respected owner of Ibrahim's Diner. Sources suggest that Amina's sudden collapse was related to her condition, and that the sheriff may be involved in ways that could change Eldon Creek forever." Inside, Jack could hear the muffled sound of Clara's voice. He turned to Ibrahim, desperation in his eyes. "I didn't want it to come to this, not like this. But now, we have to protect Amina. The town is going to talk, and it's only going to get worse." Ibrahim's shoulders slumped, the fight momentarily leaving him. The truth, now out in the open, threatened to consume them all. He looked at Jack, the weight of a father's love mixed with the sting of betrayal. "You protect her, Sheriff. I don't care what it costs you, but you make sure my daughter is safe. Do you hear me?" Jack nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise." The door to Amina's room creaked open and she peeked out, eyes glistening with tears as she saw her father and Jack standing together. She knew that the secrets that had once bound them all were now free, unleashed into a world that wouldn't be kind. The fight for her future and theirs was just beginning. The sun had barely risen over Eldon Creek, casting long shadows across the town that now buzzed with rumors and half-truths. At the sheriff's department, Jack sat in his office, the weight of everything pressing down on him like a mountain. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since Clara Whitman's report aired. Calls from town officials, curious citizens, and reporters alike all demanding answers. The once respected sheriff was now the center of a scandal that threatened to engulf him. Deputy Harris stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of worry and loyalty. "Sheriff, the mayor's on line 1. He's demanding an explanation." Jack ran a hand over his face, exhaustion etched into his features. Tell him I'll speak at the town hall at noon. It's time they hear the truth from me." Harris nodded and left, his footsteps fading down the hall. The quiet that followed was deafening, and Jack felt the loneliness of his choices settle in. He reached for the framed photo on his desk, a picture of him shaking hands with the town's elders at the last 4th of July parade. He had once been their hero. Now he was a pariah. Noon came faster than Jack expected. The town hall was packed, the air thick with tension and whispered speculation. Clara Whitman stood at the back, her notepad ready, eyes sharp and eager for a story. Ibrahim was there too, his face unreadable, standing with his arm protectively around Amina, who kept her head low. The room fell silent as Jack stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here," Jack began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "There's been a lot of talk these past days, and it's time the truth is told. I have failed this town. I made choices that hurt the people I care about most, and for that, I am deeply sorry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some eyes softening with pity while others narrowed in anger. Jack's gaze flickered to Amina. She met his eyes for the briefest moment, and he saw the fear there mixed with something else. Hope. "I take full responsibility for my actions," Jack continued. "I know that my position as sheriff means I am held to a higher standard, and I did not live up to that. I betrayed the trust you all placed in me, and I know I must face the consequences." Clara's voice cut through the silence. "Sheriff, are you resigning?" The question hung in the air, each person holding their breath for his answer. Jack swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had thought about this moment, turning it over in his mind until there was nothing left but exhaustion. "Yes," he said finally. "Effective immediately. But before I step down, I want you all to know that Amina and her family deserve respect and privacy. They have been dragged into this because of me, and I won't allow any more harm to come to them." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices, some in disbelief, others shouting questions. Ibrahim's eyes glistened, but he nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that Jack had done the right thing, however late it may have been. Later that evening, Eldon Creek seemed quieter than ever. Jack sat on the steps of his home, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The once proud sheriff's badge lay on the table beside him, a symbol of what he had lost. The sky above was a swirl of purples and oranges, the kind of sunset that usually brought him peace. But tonight it only reminded him of endings. A rustle of footsteps on the gravel made him look up. Amina stood there, hesitant and wrapped in a long cardigan, her eyes red from crying. "Jack," she said softly, taking a step closer. "I just wanted to say goodbye." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to, Amina. You and your family should focus on moving forward. I made sure the town knows you weren't at fault." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know, my father told me. It means a lot that you stood up for us, even when it cost you everything." A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words and what-ifs. Jack's chest ached, but he knew this was how it had to be. "Amina, you deserve a future where you don't carry the mistakes of others on your shoulders. Go after your dreams, no matter how hard it seems," Jack said, his voice thick. "I will," she whispered. "And I hope you find peace, Jack." As she turned and walked away, Jack watched her go, feeling a bittersweet sense of relief. The choices they'd made had brought them both to this moment, but now they each had a chance to rebuild. The following week, the town of Eldon Creek moved on, as small towns do. Clara's story was picked up by bigger papers, but after the initial scandal, the whispers began to fade. Amina and her family prepared to move back to Chicago, leaving behind memories too painful to hold on to. And Jack? He stayed, watching from afar as the town he once protected slowly accepted the new normal. He spent his days repairing fences at his old family property, finding solace in the simple work, trying to piece together the man he wanted to be. Eldon Creek, scarred but resilient, moved forward, and somewhere in the echoes of that quiet town, hope began to take root once more. Even in the hearts where guilt and sorrow had once dwelled,